The legal architecture governing limited liability companies has undergone a radical transformation in the first quarter of 2026. Corporate governance professionals and executive leadership teams are currently navigating a dangerous new reality known as the Transparency-Liability Paradox. On one side, governments are piercing the traditional corporate veil through aggressive new transparency mandates, like the Corporate Transparency Act. On the other side, jurisdictions like Florida are introducing sophisticated horizontal liability shields through the Protected Series LLC legislation. As of February 2026, the corporate veil is no longer a static shield, it is a dynamic membrane requiring active daily maintenance. The new standard is the 2026 Prong Test, a composite regime of strict compliance hurdles determining if an entity's protection will hold. This regime is characterized by the tension between the drive for visibility and the drive for segmentation. Courts are moving away from equitable intent-based standards for veil piercing toward strict statutory compliance tests. In state commercial courts, the failure to maintain distinct records for series LLCs results in a strict liability collapse of the shield. This happens regardless of the owner's fraudulent intent or lack thereof. The overarching conclusion is that the era of passive asset protection has completely ended. In 2026, liability shields are only as strong as the data governance systems that support them. Executives must adopt a posture of defensive data governance, treating beneficial ownership information as toxic data. This toxic data must be sequestered while operationalizing the Prong test through automated forensic-level accounting. Failure risks the catastrophic loss of the liability shield itself, exposing the entire enterprise to the debts of a single distressed unit. The central conflict defining this landscape is the Transparency-Liability Paradox. This arises from laws demanding radical transparency, the glasshouse effect, clashing with laws permitting radical segmentation, the fortress effect. The Corporate Transparency Act and the New York LLC Transparency Act represent a paradigm shift in state and corporate relations. For over a century, internal ownership of private companies was shielded from federal view, a matter of state law. Now, the privilege of limited liability comes with a strict federal duty of disclosure. Executives seek privacy for legitimate reasons, like competitive advantage, personal safety, and protection from frivolous litigation. But the new transparency regime criminalizes these privacy strategies, carrying penalties of up to 2 years in prison under the CTA. Legal intelligence insights reveal that these transparency filings create a discovery roadmap for plaintiffs' attorneys. Creditors can now map the entire corporate structure, identifying deep-pocket beneficial owners who were previously invisible. In response, sophisticated entities are turning to Protected Series LLCs, allowing a single LLC to house unlimited protected series. The parent LLC is the hive, and each series is a separate cell. The debts of cell A cannot reach the honey in cell B, offering infinite subsidiaries under one umbrella. But to gain the benefit of this fortress structure, the entity must engage in rigorous, granular record-keeping. Florida introduced the Three-Prong Recordkeeping Test to ensure entities prove they keep their assets completely separate. If the records are not perfect, the burden of proof fails, the walls between the cells dissolve, and the creditor takes everything. Consider a real estate investment trust using a Florida Series LLC to hold 50 separate properties. To comply with transparency pressures, the REIT must expose its structure to regulators, making it a target. If a bookkeeper pays one property's bill from another series account, the Prong test is failed. The executive is trapped Transparency laws force disclosure, while liability laws make the segregated structure fragile to administrative error. While Florida redefines liability, the federal battleground focuses on the constitutionality of the Corporate Transparency Act. The landmark 2025 ruling in National Small Business United v. Yellen validated federal authority to regulate corporate formation. The 11th Circuit Court ruled that forming an LLC is an economic act that substantially affects interstate commerce. This effectively federalizes the internal affairs doctrine, allowing Congress to mandate transparency conditions. The court found that the aggregate class of anonymous shell companies creates a systemic vulnerability for the U.S. financial system. However, enforcement remains in flux due to a nationwide injunction by a Texas court in Smith v. Treasury. The Texas court ruled that mandatory disclosure of personal data without a warrant constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure. This creates a Schrodinger's compliance state where the law is constitutional in some states but paused nationwide. To maintain the horizontal shield in Florida, companies must pass the Three-Prong Recordkeeping Test. First, records must identify the asset and completely distinguish it from any other asset of the parent or sister series. Second, records must determine exactly when and from whom the protected series acquired the asset. Without a clear entry date, courts will presume the asset was transferred fraudulently to avoid liability. Third, any transfer internally must have its consideration paid, the payor and the payee explicitly documented. A transfer without documented fair value consideration is a per se violation, breaking the shield. If the records fail the disinterested individual standard, the shield falls, regardless of fraudulent intent. This makes strict bureaucratic competence a primary liability defense. Meanwhile, the New York LLC Transparency Act creates a new layer of liability for foreign entities operating in the state. Incorrectly claiming an exemption constitutes perjury, opening the door for the Attorney General to dissolve the entity. Financial penalties include a $500 per day fine enforced rigorously through an automated state portal. Registering to do business in a state now exposes the entity to the jurisdictional trap created by the Mallory decision. By registering, the LLC consents to general jurisdiction, meaning it can be sued in New York for accidents occurring far away. Defense firms are now using AI tools to measure the legal delta, predicting dispute outcomes by analyzing compliance variables. Analysis proves that automated, time-stamped asset ledgers are the most valuable action a company can take to win a dismissal. To survive, executives must sequester beneficial ownership information in a disconnected dark vault. Accounting software must be configured to force a hard stop on commingled funds, ending manual bookkeeping vulnerabilities. Finally, companies must perform a jurisdictional audit and withdraw dormant registrations to avoid catastrophic exposure. Subscribe for more insights on the laws that shape business. The law doesn't wait.